Hi, and welcome to Politics by Numbers. I'm Bryony, and this week Martin Baxter and I are joined by Xander Elliards, political editor of the Scottish daily newspaper The National, to look at where Scotland stands after the 2026 Holyrood elections. We'll be chatting a little bit about the first use of MRP polling in Scotland, what the results mean for the independence movement, and whether reforms arrive will make the road to the next general election even more unpredictable. So, Xander, firstly, thank you for joining us. Let's kick it off and look at the results itself. The SNP came out as the largest party. Then we had Reform and Labour tied second. But was there anything that surprised you, and what did you make of the overall result?
Yeah, you mentioned Labour and Reform tied for second. They got 17 seats each. And in the polling building up to it, we were kind of seeing this jostling for second place. Occasionally, the Greens really up there as well. But I think everybody was expecting Labour or Reform to come second. And a tie, it hasn't happened before. And it has raised these questions like, what on earth do you do at First Minister's questions, where you're meant to go in the order of the size of the parties? And the new presiding officer has brought in this system where, well, basically he said, we're going to go at random. So that's resulted in a really interesting new dynamic in the parliament. But in terms of what surprised me, I mentioned the Greens occasionally in the polling being up there with Labour and Reform. Some were saying they could come second overall. I personally didn't really think that was going to happen. Back in 2021, we saw a lot of polls were saying similar things. We're going to see this massive resurgence for the Greens. They might overtake the Conservatives. And honestly, my own thinking was these polls are doing exactly the same as they were doing 5 years ago. They're showing that the Greens are going to overtake the Tories. Is that actually going to happen? I don't think it will. I was proven very wrong. The Greens are now, well, fourth, technically, of course, because Labour and Reform are joint second. But on 15 MSPs, they're a really serious force in the Parliament. They overtook both the Lib Dems, which obviously they'd done previously, but the Tories as well, which is a real coup for the Greens. And honestly, yeah, that did surprise me. I wasn't expecting this many Green MSPs after the elections.
And with the Conservatives as well, that was pretty expected drop. Is that what you were watching as you were reporting on it?
Yeah, I was expecting the Tories to drop. I mean, they've gone historically low. I think they were on 31 MSPs, which, if you were going to ask me my biggest surprise from the 2021 elections, it was the fact that the Tories in 2016 got 31 MSPs. It was a record high under Ruth Davidson. Somehow Douglas Ross managed to repeat that result in 2021 and get 31 MSPs. This was a real success for the Tories. So they really had nowhere to go but down. I was expecting them to maybe half their representation to 15, 16 MSPs. As it turned out, they got 12, which is, yeah, really low for the Tories. There's just not a force anymore in Scottish politics.
And that's Reform feeding into that voter base. Coming over to you, Martin, this is the first time that we've done MRP this year for Scotland. So a question to both of you. How did they stack up? What was your opinion of doing the MRP polling for Scotland?
Yes, Brian, we did a poll, one of the very first MRP polls for Scotland in conjunction with Xander and the National before the Holyrood election. And that came out quite well because we correctly predicted the SNP were going to be close to or even with a majority, which is what happened. They were just short and they would be in a coalition with the Greens. And we got the order of the parties right, that we had Labour and Reform battling for second place, Greens ahead of the Conservatives and Lib Dem, as Xander mentioned, so that I feel quite pleased by the way that MRP came out. It gave the broad outline of the result fairly well. I don't know what you think, Xander, about how that MRP worked for you.
There were so many MRPs, and as you mentioned, ours was the second to ever get published. We were hoping to be the first, weren't we? We just got pipped to the post. But what was quite striking about the early MRPs, which is the group that this ended up falling under, is they were all largely in agreement that there was going to be the SNP is the largest party, I think 67 seats around that. And they were all saying, basically, the battle will be in the constituencies. It will be the SNP on 38% of the vote or something around that versus the second party in every constituency. And I'm trying to remember some of the details. I think the electoral calculus one had Labour losing in Dumbarton but winning in Edinburgh Southern. And they ended up winning both.
There's always some constituencies behaving in an idiosyncratic way. Except we tend to look at if the overall totals are in the right direction, then that's encouraging.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
obviously voters and individual seats will always do their own thing.
Yeah. The point that I was ultimately driving at, I suppose, was this MRP, all the MRPs together. What they did really, really well was they showed us where to look. They showed us which constituencies were basically sewn up for the SNP and which ones were really going to decide the election, because that's what this came to, this election. It was decided in the constituencies. The question was, can the SNP win 65 constituencies? Can they get that majority in the constituencies alone? The list side, the proportional representation side of the election really took a back seat. And that meant that the MRPs were really, really valuable to us kind of politics watchers, because we knew where to look. We were looking in Aberdeenshire West, we were looking in Dumbarton, we were looking in Edinburgh Southern, Edinburgh Central, Glasgow Southside. These swing constituencies where it could have gone to the SNP or it could have gone to another party. We knew exactly where to look, and it proved really, really valuable, and it allowed us to predict, I think, relatively accurately.
Brilliant. We're going to get on to a little bit of the themes that evolved throughout this election. And one of them, of course, is the arrival of reform into Scotland. And one reading that came out of the election across the whole of the UK in general was the devolved nations all being led by nationalists. But reform is bringing in their own British nationalism. Now that they've entered into the devolved nations quite strongly, there's now this contest between Scottish nationalism and British nationalism.
I definitely think you've summed up where the contest is going to be, and I think you're right. It is these two opposing visions of nationalism. There's the SNP and the Greens' vision of an independent Scotland and that more progressive society that they're pushing for, and then you have the unionist parties on the other side who are trying to present this kind of not nationalist view of nationalism. You very much hear it from Labour, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems. So as you say, the question is, which one of those two nationalisms will Scots opt for? And I think there's a real danger for people on the unionist side of the argument that reform becomes the symbol of what British nationalism is. I think the trouble Labour are having is that they are the second party too. As we've said multiple times, they are tied with reform in the parliament. But nobody is talking like that. Everybody is talking as if reform are the second party. Labour need to work out how they can reclaim this narrative and say, no, we represent the union. It's this unified, better together union, not this quite nasty, like muscular British nationalism that reform represent. Labour in Westminster are the biggest party in Scotland. Unless they can really, really boost their voice, it is going to be, as you rightly said, Bryony, the SNP's vision of a nationalist independent Scotland or Reform's vision of this quite hard right nationalist Britain, and Scots will be asked to make the decision between the two.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm struck by not so much the left-right difference between kind of nationalism and not nationalism, that the recent May elections, if there was a common theme, was that nationalists all over were doing well, and sort of non-nationalist parties were not doing well. And that's a relatively new thing in British politics. I just wonder if it's going to continue. I guess we're going to watch and see, both in Scotland and throughout the rest of the UK, what happens on that.
It's like you say, Xander, must be frustrating for Labour because, yes, they are joint second and they are just as an opposition party now as Reform are. Do you think it's a Keir Starmer problem, a Labour problem in general?
I think it's really a Keir Starmer problem. Yeah, I mean, what happened in 2024? Everybody looked to Labour and said, we need the Tories gone. We need them gone more than anything. I mean, the Tory party had descended to absolute chaos. It's easy to forget how bad things were before the 2024 general election. We looked to Keir Starmer as a United Kingdom elected this massive Labour majority, huge. The mandate to do anything he likes. 450 odd MPs. He could literally change the country in any way he liked, and no one would be able to stand in his way. And what's he done? Tinkered round the edges.
Let me interrupt you there, Xander.
Yeah.
Suppose let's do a hostage to fortune. We're recording this at the moment where the leadership of the Labour Party is in doubt, and it's possible, though we don't know at all, that Andy Burnham might succeed Keir Starmer. If he did that, would that help Labour in Scotland, do you think?
I don't think it matters if it's Andy Burnham, if it's Keir Starmer. I think what matters is what they do. I think Andy Burnham has been making some positive sounds. Whether or not he'll follow through with them, Keir Starmer, before his election as Labour leader, was saying, I'll abolish the House of Lords, I'll renationalise water, rail. I think if whoever is the new Labour leader, because there's little doubt Keir Starmer's going to stay in power, whoever is the new Labour leader comes in willing to use that massive majority, that massive mandate for change, and say, right, I've got 450 MPs, no one can stand in my way. That, I think, might change the tides. As you say, there's a pro-independence leader in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland. Without major change, more tinkering around the edges, I think the UK is going to end up, well, England specifically is going to end up voting for reform, and the UK will end up with a reform government.
Historically, as you mentioned, prior to the 2024 election, the amount of times that the Conservatives were changing leader, it drove, I think, the public crazy. But I want to quickly kind of focus a little bit on the SNP and the Greens together. They've got a lot of policies that are aligned, but in the last Parliament, there were a few issues around trans rights. Do you think there's going to be that problem in the next Parliament?
They weren't really a major area of tension between any of the parties until these like gender critical campaigns started. Like the SNP, the Greens, they were in government together when they passed the gender reform recognition bill, unanimous support. It wasn't controversial at all until these outside actors started taking an interest. The UK government being one of them blocked the reforms unilaterally. Yeah, I mean, Humza Yousaf ultimately had to resign because he unilaterally cut that deal with the Greens. I think that was the real issue between the SNP and the Greens. There was a really famous interview that the now co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Gillian Mackay, gave after Humza Yousaf unilaterally ended that SNP Green agreement, where she was getting emotional, and you could see how they really, really cared about it, and they really did want to make the country better and work together as a coalition to improve things for people. And having the kind of rug pulled under their feet, I think that they felt there was a huge lack of respect there. I can't see why tensions like that should arise again.
Looking ahead now, as we're on the road to the next general election, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the SNP and the Greens collectively will manage to keep independence at the centre of the conversation? Will that be a driving force towards 2029 or sooner, potentially?
Politics changes so quickly all the time. It's really hard to know what's going to be happening in 3 weeks, let alone 3 years. But I think, can the SNP and the Greens keep independence at the centre of the conversation? The reason that people in Scotland are talking about independence all the time isn't because of the SNP. Like, you go to the pub, people will talk about independence, but they won't even be able to tell you who the First Minister is. And I think that's why Labour in the last election, the Holyrood election, saw this collapse in their support that's been happening for, well, ever since the referendum, really, because they're refusing to address what the people of Scotland want to address, which is independence. It's at the centre of every political conversation. If we're 1 year out from the 2029 general election and the polls are saying, as they've been saying for the last couple of years, reform majority, the SNP really don't have to put independence anywhere. It will be at the centre of the conversation, because people will naturally be asking themselves, what do we do if England votes for Nigel Farage?
I agree that if Reform get into government in Westminster, which is at the moment more likely to happen as a coalition than an outright majority, but at the moment Reform would certainly be the largest party, that would, I think, put a lot of boosters under independence movement pressure in Scotland.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 3 years, or a little bit sooner, whether a general election will come up. But that's all we've got time for. So I want to thank you, Xander, for giving us that time today and all the insights onto the Scottish landscape, and looking forward to chatting to you in the future. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.